Howdy, welcome to Santa Barbara Forum. Tom Raftican, guest host here. I'd like to thank Michael Nicholson for inviting me. It's always a pleasure working with Michael. We've worked together for a long, long time, probably as long as our guest this evening. He and I have worked together. We've got an interesting guest this morning. Bob Osborn is a fisheries consultant, and we've worked together, like I said, going back 25 years or so. But Bob has worn many, many hats. And one of those hats was a CPA, a certified public accountant, worked for Kenneth Leventhal for a decade or so. And that's among the many things that Bob has done along the line. Recently, when I say recently, this is for the past 15 years, Bob has put an extraordinary amount of time into looking seriously at climate, what changes climate. And we're going to explore a number of things today. But first of all, Bob, welcome to Santa Barbara Forum.
Oh, thank you. Love being here.
It's great having you here. And like I said, we've known each other for a long, long time and tended to argue about enough things over the years that this is kind of going to be fun. Before we get into climate change, before we do that, we were talking about models and how models work. And I think it would be good, can you give us a little bit of background about models and where they fit in here?
Yeah, I started with models when I actually started as a CPA, working on large real estate models of build-outs of city-size projects. And when you build a model, you want to make sure that you need to validate your assumptions in the model to make sure that the model actually reflects what's been happening in the markets and so forth. And then for the climate, you want it to be able to replicate past climate, and hopefully then it will be effective at also predicting future climate.
Okay, so a model kind of paints a picture of what happened in the past and how it comes along if it works well. And then hopefully we can project even a little bit in the future.
Yes.
Cool. On the work that you've done on climate change, models are important. There's something else that I really want to get back into, and that's our fishing. Okay?
All right.
and come on, Tom, don't talk about fishing now. But it's important because when people that fish a lot, we work on the tides, okay? The rise and fall of the tides are things that really set up what happens fishing. What causes the tides to rise and fall?
Well, the sun and the moon. Gravity from the sun and the moon is what causes the tides to rise and fall. And so that gravity comes from any celestial object out there, including the moon, the sun, and the other planets in our solar system, and even some amounts of gravity that are outside our known solar system.
It's important, but I think in particular for our viewers, we start looking at the tides. And the tides, during the course of every 24 hours, you'll get 2 high tides and 2 low tides. And whether they're, I think right here on the Central Coast, they probably rise and fall about 3 to 5 feet, something like that. If you're in Alaska, those tides may rise and fall 15, 16, 17 feet, other places less. But that gravitational pull of the moon, we're talking about moving oceans.
Yes. When it comes to tides, they vary because of the geography around the ocean. In some places, the flow of water gets funneled into narrower places, and that's exactly how swells are enlarged or made smaller too, is the narrowing of water that's moving in the ocean. The tides are actually what move all the currents in our ocean ultimately, and the pulling of the water by the sun and the moon, which I'll bring up a slide here. We have two high tides and 2 low tides a day, and it's not that they're caused by the sun and the moon separately, because the sun and the moon work together to create a tide. And in the next slide here, this is basically what the effect of gravity does to any round object, a spherical object out in space. It elongates it, it stretches it. The actual physical land masses of the Earth actually stretch several inches, you know, as the moon goes around, or as the Earth revolves around in the face of the moon, and as the moon goes around the Earth as well.
I think it's really important to note here that we're talking about an immense, I mean, we're moving immense mass to do this.
Right.
And this is the moon, you know, we look up in the sky and the moon's, you know, pretty far away, but the thing is, it has a direct impact on the tides on the Earth.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this, you see the bulbs, there's the bulbs on both sides with the moon giving gravity. And the reason that happens is because, and that's why we have 2 tides a day as the Earth turns around, is that we have the gravity pulls both the water on this side of the moon further towards the moon than it does the actual solid Earth, and then the solid Earth actually moves more towards the moon than the water on the backside, because the force of gravity is determined by an exponential function of the distance to the moon. And so the further away from the moon you are, the less gravity you have pulling you. And so that's why you can get a bulge on the backside, is simply because the Earth is moving more than the water.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is interesting.
And the other thing, and the thing I keep trying to get across, is the fact that these are tremendous forces. These, I mean, this is moving oceans.
Now, this is practically considered in physics to be the ultimate force in physics. It applies just about to everything. Einstein took it a long ways and even has it controlling time and you know, through warping of space. And so understanding how gravity works to change our world is really important, and we know that as fishermen related to tides. We fish the tides all the time, and the water comes out on our beaches and comes back in, and it's all due to the gravity of these objects that are going around us, or as we spin in the face of them as well. And so that's what the topic of this talk basically is to talk about how do we know what it is that this has an effect on climate. And very clearly it does. There was a scientist back in the 1920s that postulated that the big temperature ranges that the Earth goes through in about 100,000 year cycle brings about ice ages where the ice expand greatly. Or
okay, we're jumping a little bit ahead because we're talking about the moon coming back and forth and affecting tides. Do other planets have an impact?
Well, that's actually the important part when it comes to climate, because we've defined climate as a long-term type effect. The moon only has a short-term effect. The tides only last about 6 hours or so as the Earth spins around. And so the effect that would change our climate in relationship to the Earth would be an object out in space pulling us closer to the sun or further away from the sun, or speeding up the planet in its orbit or slowing it down. And it does both those things because the force of gravity on an orbit has 2 effects. And I have a slide here on that one that shows the effect of the moon on the orbit of the Earth. As you can see, the standard elliptical orbit of the Earth is affected by the moon. It pulls it inside and outside around the thing 12 times a year.
Okay, so it's not actually a totally perfect elliptical orbit. There are slight variations along the line in there.
You know, all these wavy things are perturbations to that orbit that make us get closer to the sun or further away from the sun. And that itself has a climate effect for about 14 days, which Milankovitch recognized.
All right, Milankovitch is the one that did the seminal work on this, And you're saying this is basically 125 years ago, roughly,
Right.
early 1900s, let's say.
Yeah, it was around 1920 when he was doing his
Okay.
work, and it was published over the next 20 years, and it was translated into English in about 1940.
Okay, so the work that he was done, has this been documented along the line at all?
Well, it hasn't been carried forward into modern science.
Okay,
It's
but
very
but
difficult.
his work at the time, it's like, okay, fine, this works. We can see where it actually worked.
Yes, we can see it works, and we can see that it's missing in our models for climate, because the climate models that we have do not reflect the natural variations that we see from these effects. The 1940s, for example, is a really good example of that. And so to go a little bit further into this discussion of the orbit, this is how the Earth's orbit varies. You might say this is kind of like the mean orbit, and then when the planets and other objects out in space pull on it more, it might pull us further away from the sun, or it might pull us closer to the sun.
Okay, and this graph actually does a very good job of laying that out. But you see changes in the orbits. Why are there changes in the orbit of the Earth? Is it the way the planets line up?
Right. You have one planet, like for example, Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. It has an effect on climate on a regular basis that covers periods that are roughly around about 5 years or so. And you can see that variation occurs. We sometimes call it ENSO, because the ocean is affected by this, and it seems to be pretty much in time with Jupiter, although those connections have not been researched and have not been looked into a great deal to determine how Jupiter may affect the ENSO El Niños and La Niñas that we have. And so this pull of these planets are going to be the sum of all the planets that are pulling in the same direction when they are in the same direction, and they rarely get in line with each other.
That might be a good thing.
Yes. And if they get in line one way, they're going to make our orbit less, and if they get in line another way, they're going to make our orbit more.
Okay, we rotate around the sun once a year.
Right.
I mean, that is our calendar year. It's one rotation. The moon rotates around the Earth once every 28 days. So we know two of those basically orbits and suborbits. How do the other planets, what are their rotation around the sun?
Well, most of the planets that are inside of the Earth's orbit are shorter term orbits, and so they create an effect like the previous slide of creating a weave in the orbit, and it covers less than a year generally. So that would not necessarily affect our climate very much, although it will help peaks of those climates over short periods of time, and it will create like temporary peaks that last for a few months.
Impacts, but
half a
lesser
year.
Lesser
impacts, yes.
Okay.
And also, I mean, Venus has a great deal of impact on our orbit, but it's a short-term impact that lasts maybe don't have the number in front of me, but maybe half a year or less. And so that is not considered to be climate change. Climate change is considered to be a longer period of time. So as you go outside of our orbit to the outer planets, particularly to Jupiter, it takes about 12 years to go around the sun.
Okay.
Then you go to the next one, which is probably the next most powerful one affecting our climate, is Saturn, and it takes 30 years to go around the sun. And then you go one more to Uranus, and it takes 84 years to go around the sun. Mm-hmm. And then the last planet that we know of is Neptune, and it takes about 165 years to go around the sun.
So each one of these planets are rotating, and obviously they're on their own schedule. They're not lined up always,
and they're not evenly dividable, in orbit. So it creates a very chaotic type variation in climate from these these effects, and the big question is how much. And we can see some of this in our temperature records and in the ice core records. We can see some of this.
I think first of all we see the Earth as, and the Earth is not the center of our solar system. The sun is, but we're out there and we're a moving entity, and there are 8 other moving entities, but not necessarily in concert with where we're at, and obviously on different time schedules. So this is quite a chess game. This is 3-dimensional chess. These things are all moving in different times.
Yeah, it's fairly easy to figure out the maximums, because then you take the orbit periods and you do a lot of mathematics, and you can determine when a maximum will occur, and when a maximum effect will occur. And then it's also important as to where the alignment is in relationship to our orbit, because there are certain factors about how, when you have an elliptical orbit, the Earth moves out towards the longest point, and it slows while it goes there, and the slowest point is right at what they call the periapsis, at the longest distance from the sun. And then as it starts coming in, it starts accelerating again, and then when it comes around the backside of the sun, it's going the fastest. And I have a slide. Let me go back to this other slide here. This is noting it moves slower on this side of the ellipse and faster than the other one. The next slide really starts to get. Oh, I wanted to make other point here, is that the difference of this occurs from the maximum distance from the sun we get to the minimum of this orbital change. It creates a 23% difference in the amount of sunlight we receive, in terms of between summer and winter. And so, generally speaking, out here in the colder part, we spend more time out here because it's moving slower out here.
Okay.
And when in the warm part, we're spending less time because it's moving a lot faster. And so that has those speed effect, the two things, the effect of speed on Earth and the distance from Earth, both add up to make the climate change.
Okay. And I think the most important thing, and we don't really see it here, you can see the effects of it here, is you have other planets out there circling around in different orbits, different trajectories, and when each one of those is individually pulling on the Earth. So this kind of changes the model a little bit down the line, right?
Yeah, well, it's the sum and vectors of the pull. In other words, if they're separated by a long distance, they will not pull in the same direction. If they may pull against each other, or when they get lined up, they're all pulling in the same direction.
Right. So now we're getting down to the where the rubber meets the road on this.
Right.
Okay. So if you have two planets that are in the same quadrant, orbiting the sun, and the same quadrant away from the Earth, those act in concert, and they would. What kind of effect does that have?
Right. Well, let me go to the next slide here, because that's kind of where I lay that out. This is a look at the orbit with different positions for a single planet. Okay, to keep it simple.
Okay.
And I have a little description there about what I think that is occurring, because the Earth is rotating around this direction, around the sun. And so if the planet is out here, it's pulling this orbit out a little bit further here, but it's also speeding up the speed of the Earth coming around here through the slowest part. And when it comes down here, it's actually slowing the speed of the Earth as it goes by the warmest part.
Okay, but it still comes out to the same. We still have 365 days in a year. 365 point something.
And so by slowing it down in front of the sun, speeding it up where it's cold, you create a different mean temperature.
Okay.
And so the trick is in actually building a model of the solar system for its effects on the climate. so that we can know how this changes over time. There's a regular clicking of these things that occur together. Like, for example, Saturn and Jupiter meet in the same area of the sky once every 20 years, but they don't always meet in the same area of the sky. So you don't get the same change every 20 years. You get a different kind of change from it.
Okay, and how could you kind of give us an idea of what you're talking about on this graph? Or, you know, they're lining up,
right? Well,
but they may not line up with the other six planets.
To help clarify, this ellipse is very much exaggerated. This ellipse.
Yep.
The actual ellipse is quite circular. So the sun's gravity on the Earth has a strong hold on the Earth.
The strongest.
Causes it to fall to the sun at the same rate that it goes around the sun.
Yeah.
And so if you put another planet out here, it's going to compete a little bit with the sun, but the sun is much more powerful than the planet, so it's not going to move it that much, okay? And so, but what can happen and can move it a lot is the change in speed, because the gravity of the sun is perpendicular to the direction that the Earth is going, and so the sun has a minimal impact on the speed of the planet around the sun.
Okay.
But the planets can line up directly in line with the direction of travel of the Earth and accelerate.
At which point it is perpendicular,
right,
but at most points it is not.
Right, and so I've just laid this graph out. It may not be perfectly correct, but it is something to start with. You're going to have to get down with the calculations and get down with actually using all the sines and cosines and trigonometry and mathematics that it would take to put together a model with this, to begin to understand exactly how much it will affect sunlight. And until you do that, you don't know.
This is really pretty interesting stuff. It's also pretty complex. What does it take to develop models like this?
Well, I would say what you need to do is somebody like JPL, you know, has some of the best astronomical data. Number one, they have the mathematicians and the computer programmers that can do that. It's certainly a lot easier than trying to model climate as we do it now.
Well, should we talk about the current climate models?
Sure, we could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, tell me about them.
Well, the current climate models pretty much concentrate on CO2 and the effects of CO2. There are other effects that they include in there that they consider to be minor, like how much brighter the sun might get, or how much aerosols and changing in aerosols and clouds and so forth can occur.
Other things within the atmosphere.
Yeah, some of these things may be minor, they may be major. A lot of the things we don't know much about. Mm-hmm. And so developing a full-on climate model that actually can model past climate temperatures is the objective. And this is something that I haven't seen anybody taking any kind of shot at.
Well, the climate model we have now, with varying degrees of components in the atmosphere, how repeatable are those models?
Well, the models that they have are all based on one concept. They have like 30 models, and they all run on the same basic concept of CO2 back radiation effects, and then they try to model convection and other things within the atmosphere and aerosols and how they might change, and attempt to do that, and they come up with an estimate of pretty much smooth change of climate over a long period of time as CO2 increases. But we can just look at the temperature record and see that's not the case.
That was what I was going to get around to. How accurate are the models?
Right. Well, the models models right now are continue to estimate the same amount that they estimated in 1979, and we haven't come anywhere close to that rate of warming. Currently, I think that the consensus among scientists is that observations say that we've warmed about 1.2 to 1.3 degrees, and in the past 165 years.
Okay, We'll go back to Milankovitch. He did this work 100 years ago. How accurate was his model?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been able to get a copy of his book. You know, it seems to be missing. I can't find it anywhere. But the bottom line of it is he did estimate about how much, you know, the maximums were. He estimated the maximum things. Those would be things that you could mathematically calculate out fairly easily, okay?
Yeah.
And to find what a maximum is, just by lining all the planets up in the right place would be one way to go about doing it, and seeing how much pull you get out of that, and you can find your maximums. To build a model, you need to be able to model it all the way 360 degrees around the sun.
Right, and again, the complexity of the model is going to be astronomical, because this is the sun, the Earth rotating around, and different planets rotating around at a different distance and a different rate, and a different trajectory also. So,
well, Milankovitch definitely found a way to cut through that. He did it all with hand calculations and didn't have the advantage of computers. In this day and age, we have computers that'll treat this like a piece of cake.
A big piece of cake. So, okay, so we'll go back, and Milankovitch should have gotten the Nobel Prize 100 years ago. And where do we go from here? How do we go forward?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to increase awareness of what this particular variable is.
Yeah.
And come up with some realistic numbers that can be supported, you know, in a process of calculation.
But this is kind of trackable. And,
yes.
and the thing is, it's trackable. The advantage that I see, and again, I'm the novice here, trust me, I'm odd man out. What I see is by putting some of these numbers together, we can run them, instead of running them forward and find out where the model takes us, we run them backwards and see how accurate they
yes.
are.
Yeah, let me go through a little bit through more of the slideshow here. This is an example of two different periods, 1981 and 2023, and the relative position of the four major gas giants out there, which probably have the most effect on our orbit. And so it just shows how they're grouped rather tightly here. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the only times in a long time that they've been grouped that tightly out in this area. And so then this comes from the Naval Observatory,
okay,
where they actually observe how many days it takes for the sun to travel from the perihelion to the aphelion, which was the aphelion's the short distance to the sun.
Okay, you're losing me on the terminology, but the thing is, we're talking about the Naval Observatory.
It's a half orbit, and it's saying the half orbit from January 23 to July 23 took 100. That's a half orbit, took 183 days.
Okay.
Then from the closest to the sun to the furthest to the sun, it only took 180 days, giving you 2.97 extra days. Okay.
In the warmer segment.
In the warmer segment.
Okay,
yes.
So our year was the same number of days, but the orbit was a little bit different because of these major planets sitting in a location that their gravitational pull exerted on the Earth actually slowed us down at a certain point and sped us up at a certain point. We got to the same place right where we started, same amount of time, but we spent a longer period of time in a colder segment.
Right. Yeah, you go to 1981 and you see what the numbers are for the same thing there. It took a little shorter time here and a lot longer time here for a difference between the two of a negative 162. So when you add the two together, you get more than 4.5 days extra in the warmer segment of the sun with the planet with the planets.
Yeah, that
going
was the
around.
year I got that bad sunburn. I remember. Yeah. It was yeah.
But anyway, so
this really is interesting
this
stuff.
gets into a lot of the technical stuff, you know, but it's just an example of how the Earth changes speed as it goes around.
Okay.
Goes around.
And then we also have to remember that all these planets can at some point line up or stay closer in that same, and would that have an impact on our climate?
Yes, I mean, we went back to this previous slide, you can see that most of the planets are over on the cool side of the sun, on the cool side of the orbit rather, and over here they're mostly on the warmer side of the orbit between these 2 years. And so what was the effect? What can we see? How does that correlate to temperatures? Well, the next graph shows the temperatures that changed from 1981 to 2023 here, and we do see that rise there occurring in time with that. And actually, it's pretty much, this is when the warming started, and it's pretty much to the current date here.
It's going to keep up in this direction?
Well, I don't think it will, because this breakup on this side is occurring right now.
Okay, so when you say breakup, you're talking about the planets?
The grouping of the tight grouping of the planets.
The tight grouping of the planets.
Jupiter, the biggest one, is already out of this group and is headed away from it. And so it's going to make a big difference here over the next several years.
Okay, and since they all travel at different rates, none of this, it's not like you have a set curve. They're going to be bumps and exterior movements along the line.
Going back here, when this in 2023, Jupiter was coming around, was up here, had not yet passed Uranus, was between Neptune, had passed Saturn a while back. At first, it passed Saturn, then Neptune, and it has since passed Uranus in 2024. And meanwhile, Saturn is catching up with Neptune and Uranus. Uranus passed Neptune in 1993. And this is all out here in this grouping here. They've been milling in this area, you might say, you know, kind of passing each other, with the fastest one coming in last, the next last, and in order. Over the last, since pretty much Neptune was up here, then, and it's only gotten over here this far. Meantime, Jupiter's gone around a few times. You know, it's gone around.
Well, I'm sitting here and I'm lost. I'm trying to follow your conversation, thinking, okay, this one's moving once every 165 years. This one,
I don't want to get too far into the trees here.
We'll
lose everybody, but it's kind of a basic idea. These planets have different speeds, and they find themselves together at various odd times, and it's pretty rare for them to have them grouped over here. I haven't found another time when that has occurred in recent history. It's pretty difficult to track the position of the planets. I don't have really good databases. I understand the Jet Propulsion Lab there at Caltech has one of the best ones.
You know, Bob, this really sounds like it. I mean, this is you document where the planets are. This we can do. We're capable of doing. We as a world are capable of doing that. We can see the effects that they have, and also I think the ripples in our orbit. I mean, the numbers you have from the Naval Academy.
Naval Observatory.
Naval Observatory. Excuse me. Your work is documented too. I mean, that's the thing I like about it. We're not pulling stuff out of the air. It's fine. I can show you where this comes from.
This is all as real as gravity.
This is as real as gravity. Okay.
Right, yeah.
You drop the pen, it hits the floor. Okay. So
exactly.
And you and I know the basis of the tides. They come and go.
Right.
But you know, the thing that always kind of strikes me is that. We send rocket ships. We sent them to Saturn and gone through.
Yes.
And Mars. And Venus.
We understand this stuff.
And the moon. We understand this.
This is not new science.
This is not new science.
No. In any way, shape, or form.
why are you pulling the covers off it and everybody else is kind of sitting in the closet?
It's pretty much accidental. I mean, I went back about 15 years ago. I was looking for patterns in the warming pattern to see what was going on. It was creating all these variations. And they used to call it the decadal step. You know, that it would step up once a decade.
Well, I'm going to blow you.
And I was curious about that, so I ran some analysis on the instrument temperature records, and I found a very strong trend change that would occur on a 10-year basis. And I was talking on a forum. I'm going, see, I'm not an astronomer, and so I had no idea what it was. And I was trying to think, because everybody's thinking about suns and ENSO and ocean oscillations and things like that. And none of that made any sense, you know, or solar cycles or anything like that, because they're not the right period. And then all of a sudden, about this past year, I run into, just accidentally, I run into this effect from Saturn and Jupiter having conjuncted back in 2020. And I go, how often does that happen? And the answer comes up once every 19.85 years. I'm going, dang, that's what I've been looking for. You know?
Yeah. Pacific Decadal Oscillation. I'm gonna blow your cover a little bit here. You know, I see you doing this, and the thing is, knowing what you've done in fisheries management over the past 20 years, you know, and again, Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the different changes in oceanographic, how they come and go. Warm, cool. You know, El Nino comes. El Nino is a warming of the Pacific Ocean, and something causes that. And you know, I see the basis of what got you invested in this is the fact that you took it one step further.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been kind of like a generalist, like all the way back when I started out as a physics major, then became a philosophy major, and then became a fisherman. and worked on fishing boats in San Diego. And then I decided I was going to go back to school, and I, as a philosophy major actually, and I took courses in meteorology, and because I was interested, you know, the fishing got me interested in the weather and the climate and things like that, and the tides and so forth. And so that was all just stuff related to fishing that I kind of packed away back in the back of my head a long time ago with an interest. And even before that, before I went back well, after I worked on the fishing boat, I took a job as a home builder, carpenter, remodeler, and ran into an engineer that understood solar energy and collecting solar energy. This is back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And so he showed me how some of his designs, I was just gobsmacked by it. You know, I'm going, what? You actually get free energy that way?
Bob, I think a lot of the key to this is we've worked together for a long time. And I think a lot of this comes to that same ethics that a CPA has. It's like, I'm responsible for these figures. You know, I didn't create them, but I'm responsible for getting them correct. And I look at some of the things we've done in fisheries management over the years, and I still marvel at what you've done in helping management by, you have a lot of scientists sitting in a fisheries management room, okay? And they're all there, and they're all trying to do the right thing. They're all, and sometimes people will push them in one direction. It's like, yeah, that could work, that could work. And I just remember you sitting in the back of the room, and we're going through, and this is regarding a highly migratory species, and it was at the end of the entire day long about how this could be moving this direction, and you kind of raise your hand and go, excuse me, but that seems to come in conflict with Standard 7. And the NOAA attorney goes, because it did. And what that meant was you had paid close enough attention to the very fine particulars along the way that they had to look back and pull and make sure things were in line because NOAA does it right. And that attention to detail was key to the success in our fisheries management. We will owe you a lot on that. And I think the next is coming up here.
Well, I used to drive my parents crazy, taking the clocks apart in the house and things like that. I always like to know how
now I
things
got
work,
it. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just a matter of being enjoying what you do.
Yeah.
I really enjoy digging into this stuff, and I've enjoyed digging into this. And I got a few more slides I'd like to show the folks here. Let's see. Okay, how do we know this has a negative effect on climate? Let's go take a look at some of this stuff. And the fact is that there's a lot of people at NASA that understand this to a great deal. This is a NASA article on Milankovitch orbital cycles. And it says, over time, the pull of gravity from our solar system's two largest gas giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, causes the shape of the Earth's orbit to vary from nearly circular to slightly elliptical. So this is the foundation of Milankovitch theory of moving up to 15 degrees centigrade change in climate change over periods of time when you go from the ideal alignments to the most unideal alignments. And so it's important to understand what this is as being part of a climate model, because this does affect climate.
Sure.
And we don't know exactly how much it does. It's going to take some work and some programming and a lot of mathematics, a lot of cosines and sines and everything else in order to figure out exactly how much this changes the sunlight received.
But what we see in the rough calculations right there now are repeatable.
Right, and so let's go down through this a little bit. We got here the 23%, which I mentioned earlier, changed from when our sun is the closest each year to where it's the furthest departure from the sun. And that's NASA source also.
Okay.
And then here we have some of Milankovich's work that breaks it down into three major periods for the absolute maximum deviation of climate. But he also found a 2,500-year period of orbital forcing, which modern authors on this climate have failed to acknowledge. This peak is estimated to be about 30 to 35% of the 100,000-year orbital forcing peak.
What does that mean in English?
Well, what that means in English is that the 100,000-year one is estimated to be around about 13 degrees. And so, and of this element of the 100,000 year, let me go to the next slide. The next slide breaks it, let's see, where is it?
Well, I was going to say.
I don't have that one, okay. But anyway,
My gosh, the entire North American continent could be covered with ice.
Yeah, well.
Oh, wait, it was.
The 100,000-year orbital eccentricity, okay, is estimated to be about 50% of it is estimated to be just orbital variation.
Okay.
And the rest of it has to do with the tilt of the Earth and the propensity of that tilt to encourage more ice growth, which will make things cooler.
Okay.
Or melt the ice to make them warmer. And so, but it is a substantial amount that I've estimated to be somewhere around about 3 to 4 degrees.
Okay.
Of which you could get out of just this normal 2,500-year proposition here. And so when you go to look for this in the actual records, you can find it. Like, for example, this was one of the first guys that turned me on to this whole concept of this being a recovery from the little ice age is a doctor at the International Arctic Research Center, Dr. Sayun Ichiakasofo, who said basically what I just said about models. In order to understand anthropogenic climate change,
you have to understand
the natural. Right?
Absolutely,
right.
And this is the natural.
Right. And so here's from UK Met, the 160 some odd year temperature record. And so against this record, what I did was I looked for all the peaks and valleys and so forth, and then looked to see which planets were aligned in the warmer sectors at the time that this occurred, in the warmer half. And down here on the cold times, there was only like one planet, except for the two weakest planets in this case.
Yeah. And the big gas giants.
And the warm ones, they're all bunching up here for the last 160 years.
So let's be clear. You've added the planets in here. The data is from UK Meteorological Office and Swiss.
The Swiss effort. This tells me where the Swiss ephemeris tells me where the planets are.
Oh, okay.
And so I can tell you if
and
they're,
the meteorological
if they're
office
on the warm side
is
of the orbit or the cold side of the orbit. And
very interesting.
Yeah, so it lines up perfectly as to these peaks, okay? Now there's an underlying slope that we're not getting to here, entirely. So I'm not saying that you can jump to the conclusion that this is all that changes.
No. There are other things. I mean, we look and we see volcanoes throwing thousands and thousands of tons of ash in the air and cooling the earth. There are other natural causes that come in here and do this.
Right.
But the thing is, when you look at this, all of a sudden we're starting to get an outline of what's actually happening.
Right. And then this is a graph that came basically from Milankovitch's work altogether. And here he has the 100,000 year variation.
Okay.
Here he's got the 2,500 year variation. And you can see the difference in the heights of these things. It's a exponential scale, but I estimated that to be somewhere around about 30% of the value of the total maximum that you can get just from every 2,500 years.
Okay, and that means the maximum effect on
from going from glacial to, basically the Arctic not having any ice.
Okay, yeah. So, but Milankovitch did this 100 years ago.
Right. This is yes. This is a compilation of his work that was done in 1988.
All right. The compilation was done just more recently, 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
And he took it off of from a Mitchell source that was done in 1976.
Okay.
And so, but he was just indicating the various factors. Here's our 14-day change, we talked about earlier. Then you have the annual revolution. You have all these different things. And you come out here, you get some tectonic.
Bob, you're very familiar with the different terminology on this. I just look at it and say, okay, fine. I can see cycles. I can see the time set. And it's like, okay, fine. These are occurrences that have happened to the Earth over millennia.
That's simple to look at. To understand all this stuff, you have to read his book.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I missed that.
Right.
So.
Anyway, so then going from there, and this is probably the ultimate. If we want to have a model that actually mimics natural climate change, we have to develop a natural model that shows this.
Okay.
And this one here is put together by the CO2 Coalition, and it's 10,000 years of temperatures from ice core records. They indicate 10 periods of time that equal the type of warming that we've had now in the last 10,000 years. And they say right here, they say
a lot of it was more.
It wasn't us.
Okay. And who is the Temperature Coalition?
Temperature Coalition is a group of scientists that was put together in order to try to better talk about this topic and to get more information out there to the public about natural climate change, which is we need to understand that in order to understand what CO2 is doing.
And I think it gets back to that last slide you showed, that in order to understand anthropogenic human-caused change, you first of all have to understand the natural change. What's the natural course of events, okay? And then do we add or subtract to that?
Otherwise, you're at risk of
shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
Never. I like this. This is really cool. What's a minus 29 signify?
Well, those are temperature the temperature gradient, these are ice cores, and these are the estimated temperature of the ice at those times.
Okay.
And so,
How does that relate to temperature on the planet? Any idea
well, that's also a matter of discussion. But the one thing that we can understand here is the fact that Milankovitch outlined a number of things that were unique about ice, and that's what created, the 12 to 15 degree centigrade difference in temperature that's seen in these ice cores, okay? And so we don't expect the whole Earth mean temperature change by 12 to 15 degrees, but according to work that's been done on the Milankovitch work, they estimated that 50% of it was attributable to solar changes. How much sunlight we actually received during the year. And this could be without even the sun getting brighter or closer, just being
the
in
sun,
a certain place for a long period of time without changing its brightness.
Yeah, this was the sun as a constant, as opposed to some of the small stuff that I've seen over the course of the years talking with you, and I get beat up with it. That the sun isn't the same. They have solar storms, and tell me a little bit about that, because that also influences what's going on.
Yeah, well, actually, over the last 350 years, the sun has gotten a little brighter. There's some arguments about how much brighter it's gotten, and it may remain elusive to pin that one down, but this one appears to have much more promise of showing us what the major climate change is, because the actual brightness of the sun thing, I don't think is anything that Milankovitch ever considered.
Well, not only that, it's something we have, not that we have control over this, but their projections here. And I'm amazed that, when you see what we do with our space programs, what we see, what Elon Musk does in the private sector. I mean, I watched him land a booster.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
I watched him land a booster on the ground at Cape Kennedy. That thing comes. This isn't the old days with Buck Rogers where something comes down like this and stopped. And it was like, oh man! I mean, you see the smoke, and it's from the exhaust from the rocket, and it landed. It came back. He used that one again. So we're no longer neophytes in getting things up and getting down, and being obviously very, very, very precise on that. And when I look and think that, hey, look at we've sent stuff that you land a rover on Mars. We sent a rocket, across the solar system and landed it on another planet. Okay, some of these calculations have already have to have been done.
Yeah, I took a great appreciation of Milankovitch over the last few months as I've stumbled around these ephemeris and tried to look at this stuff. And I'm going, my God, he must have spent most of his lifetime running these formulas or something.
Oh, man. Can you think of how many pencils he went through?
Yeah, it's amazing, And so I'm going, but it's perfectly adapted for this day and age with our computers and stuff like that to do this much easier than anything that he went through. So.
And again, the thing is, in order to understand anthropogenic changes to our climate, before we start looking at that, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ask, almost demand, that the powers that be go back and explore the natural changes going on, and how do you outline them so that we have a basis, a point that you can start from.
Yes, I think that's absolutely the truth. And this one right here, I found astounding. It's not even mentioned in local climate change. You can't find it anywhere in the IPCC work. It's just been completely, ignored or overlooked.
And I think the sad thing is that I mean, literally billions of dollars are being spent on this. And this project is just a drop in the bucket compared to that. And probably if you look at NASA's work, a lot of this stuff has got to be sitting there in somebody's computer right now.
Yes, yes, absolutely is. And, and it is a good-sized effort. I mean, it's nothing out of, I mean, it's a lot more than I can do. If I was 20 years old, I might be able to be like Milagovich and do this, but.
I'll buy the pencils.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, the thing is, we have computers now, and the stuff that you've tracked it really is relevant, and it shows, and we've brought it up to date. But the thing is, it's going to take more computing power, and really, just people asking the questions: why hasn't this been done? And I want to go back and emphasize the fact that the stuff that you've brought up here, that you've put up here, are actual figures. That there is background there. All this stuff is footnoted. This is not made up. It's not pulled out of the air. These are the actual records, and they have an impact on what we're doing, and also an immense impact on how we proceed from here.
Yes.
What would the next good step be?
Well, that's what I'm actually looking for, some help here to move it into somebody that has some interest in doing this. I'm afraid that there are institutions may not want to do this. They got so many billions of dollars in mitigating money, and they may not want to go down this road. I don't know, but obviously they have the resources to do it. And I know I've worked with scientists for years and years in the fisheries scientists. I have the utmost respect for them. And all of them try to do the right job, but they have to do what they're instructed at the same time.
Science is designed to answer questions. And I suspect that the problem is perhaps the wrong questions have been asked. Mm-hmm. And they will come back with the correct answer for that question. But a lot of times I notice that, if somebody were to ask to go a little further, all of a sudden we come back with better answers. Mm-hmm. Bob Osborn, thank you so much for this insightful journey into how climate is shaping our planet and the actions behind it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. We still got a couple of seconds left. I would imagine right about now. Michael,